Maryanne, welcome along to the podcast. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Jason.
We are talking about your latest column, Tech Advances Won't Fix Humanity's Reckless Streak. And you open up your column by saying those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. So help me here. What history are we ignoring and how are we going to repeat it? It's a very ominous way to open up a column.
We're reviewing some very recent history. The Phase 2 of the Royal Commission on the Government's COVID response just opened for public submissions. What they're looking at in Phase 2 is kind of how government and science interacted. So mandates, vaccine efficacy, the health orders, lockdowns, getting feedback on that.
Those are the sort of questions that people have been waiting really to see, and the important stuff really.
There are some strong feelings on that.
Yeah, that's right.
So evaluating what was done, what should have been done differently, or what worked, that's not happened yet. But as we speak, next Monday, submissions close on the Gene Technology Bill.
Which is another bill about science and government interacting
Very
together.
much so.
Okay, I'm seeing a few parallels here.
Yeah. So this bill is trying to liberalize research of and use of gene-edited materials, products, organisms, and put in place a regulatory environment that would allow that to happen here. Because currently a lot of things are not allowed to be used or not allowed to be researched here.
Which a lot of people would say is a good thing, like...
That it's not allowed?
Yeah. Like
it's safe.
Yes. Yeah.
we know it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The promise from the coalition government is that, we're going to be the source of, cures for cancer and it's going to be great for the economy. The trouble is there's actually no evidence that any of that's going to happen.
Yeah. So where does the evidence point us
then? It's a
then?
hope.
Yeah.
That isn't backed up. Yeah, the research that's gone on overseas, more gene tech companies fail to make it.
Oh, wow.
And they're generally propped up by government grants and speculators because we don't know. They don't know
like
what's
funding the gold rush or something like that. They're kind of like, this might be...
It's very much a gamble.
Yeah.
And now and then something comes up where they have some limited success. So sickle cell anemia, which is a genetic condition, there's been some limited success with that with gene technology. However, even there, you've got what they call off-target effects, so side effects. Everything's got a side effect. You mess with the system, everything's connected.
Yes.
Other things are going to happen. The question is, are they bad enough to worry about, or can you live with them? And the off-target effects, when you deal with organisms at a cellular level, we know what mutations do. We know what cancer does. You're dealing with some pretty significant possibilities for harm there.
I heard someone say that it could even be that some of these gene editing technologies could actually activate cancer-causing cells and things like that.
Yeah, no, there are known cancer triggers in some of this technology. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what they're trying to liberalize. That research could happen here, and the assurances are, but it will be safe because it's going to be regulated.
Okay.
However, it is a regulator, a person who's responsible to the minister, from what I understand.
So the regulation, it's not even a board or a body, it's
a regulator,
one person.
Who gets to decide if something is high risk and needs higher standards, or has different levels of risk down to no risk. I'm not sure if no risk exists with
gene editing technology.
Replicating organisms. I don't know if it does, but I'm not a biologist. Low risk, well, even the worst case scenario, even if it's low risk, possibly is harmful. And then in addition to just having a single person regulating, that person gets to rubber stamp things that have been, if they're not high risk, if they've been okayed by 2 recognized jurisdictions overseas, like the FDA in the States, then it will automatically get approval here without any consideration to how it will impact our local flora and fauna, economy, health. That will be left in the hands of overseas regulators.
Just so if it's been approved by somewhere in Europe and the FDA in the States,
2 recognized bodies,
done.
Then we don't even have to
we don't even have to look at it.
Waste time, for products that people might use. And there's obvious problems with that because we've got our own unique agriculture sector here.
Yeah.
The New Zealand Institute of Economic Research estimated that if GMOs got released into the environment here, the primary sector exports could reduce by between $10 and $20 billion per year. Okay. That's their, and I mean, we don't know what we don't know. That's their estimate. It could be that bad. Yeah. So the risks are on multiple fronts.
Yeah, so health, financial, like economic, environmental, all these risks, and we're like, it'll be fine.
One of the MPs with the first reading said, we've come a long way since Corngate. You can Google
Corngate, I remember.
GE Corn, I think the year 2000. We've come a long way. The technology's come a long way. The trouble with having that attitude is just because we can do more powerful things doesn't mean it's safer.
Yeah.
It just means we can do more powerful things that have bigger effects.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully they will have good effects, but it's literally trial and error. And those errors have consequences for organisms, they have consequences for human life, and they have consequences for the environment.
Mm.
So having a single regulator and then a rubber stamp process for things that have passed overseas even like. And here's the problem with that particular. I mean, there's so many red flags.
We could go on so many different tangents here. Yeah.
And like the FDA is one of the biggest regulators, if not the biggest regulator in existence. And yet a lot of things are allowed in products and food in the States that the EU has banned. And
we don't allow here in New Zealand as well.
Some of them we do allow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But some we don't. So it's
we're a little bit
Yeah.
We're actually pretty permissive here.
Yes.
We don't think we are, but New Zealand and the US, we're the only two countries that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise direct to consumers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Go to your doctor and see if this drug is right for you.
Yeah.
The rest of the world doesn't do that because it recognizes that that's in the pharmaceutical company's best interest.
Yes.
And in the States, because the narrative is that if those companies come and do work here, it'll be great for our economy. Well, the U.S. is crawling with companies like that, and it's good for those companies to have permissiveness. Yeah. It's not good for anyone else. It's not good for the economy.
Yeah, a
and it's not good for the regulation.
Yeah, it's not necessarily great for a New Zealand economy, right? And that profits go back to the US.
No, I don't know how that's supposed to help our economy. And the products are going to be very expensive, especially early on. And the regulatory environment in the States is actually held captive by those companies. There are literally people in the FDA who've got personal, financial, and professional interests in the companies they're regulating, which explains a lot of why the regulation. And a lot of that's come out recently, which is why we should wait for phase 2 of the Royal Commission's inquiry. This came out from the 22nd statewide grand jury of Florida. They had their own kind of COVID inquiry.
Yes.
A lot of states are. This was part of their summary. Records and testimony we collected showed that time and again, sponsors, and they're talking about Pfizer and Moderna, operated hand in glove with regulators. They found, quote, a pattern of deceptive and obfuscatory behavior on the part of sponsors and regulators that often straddled the line between ethical and unethical conduct. And then they go on to talk about the way the trials were unblinded, which what that means is 6 months into the initial Pfizer trials, you've got two groups. People don't know which one they're in.
Yes.
People tracking their health don't know which one they're in. That group has had the Pfizer jab, that group has not.
Yes.
And the idea is that you compare like for like over time, and then you get to see very clearly risks and benefits.
Yes.
At 6 months in, they unblinded it and gave the vaccine to everyone, which means there's no way long-term
to know past 6 months what effects are.
And that's really serious because now we've got questions about, what are the effects on the cardiovascular health of those who've had it? What are the cancer risks? And you've got people who are convinced that the risks are much higher, and you've got people who are saying, no, they're perfectly safe. We would know if
we had the data,
the trials had, but they didn't. They intentionally unblinded them, which is really unusual. This, according to the grand jury, was a disaster from a public health perspective, casting a cloud of scientific doubt and undermining public confidence for years to come. And we've seen that.
Yeah.
We wish we could say that the unblinding and vaccinating of the placebo groups was the first and last major public health blunder we would see in the COVID-19 pandemic. The reality, however, was that the real mess was just beginning. And they talk about safety signals that were identified in post-marketing surveillance that were ignored, the media messaging, that all of the stuff that has been controversial and difficult. They named it. Those are the kind of things that should be taken into account when we look at what regulation. Sure, open up the door to this kind of technology. If you've got adequate regulation, can't be one person. It's got to be independent.
Got a regulator across an industry.
People. Yeah, they've got to take input from the industries that are affected, from the public. Have an actual transparent process, not just one person who may or may not be acting in everyone's best interest.
Yeah, or maybe operating hand in glove with some of the sponsors.
And this is what's happened in the States. And part of the problem there is the antitrust laws over the past 100 years have been eroded. And so you have, massive companies like Amazon and Pfizer and Monsanto that throw their weight around. And that just makes it less about what's in the public good and more about what's in industry interests.
Yes.
And so that has come out clearly as they looked at what's happened over the past few years. And we need to take that on board when we look at how we regulate gene technology in New Zealand. And what's out there now looks like it's just a very permissive, naive approach to these companies are going to do great things. So you should just welcome them with open arms.
Wow. That's a lot to digest, Maryanne, a lot to actually be concerned about, I think. And so people should really look into that gene technology bill, make public submissions on it.
Yeah, until the 17th of Feb, they are still open.
Yeah. And then try and follow that up as that goes through the House and hopefully is amended and able to slow things down a little bit.
Yeah, it's part of the coalition agreement. So
it's probably going to go full steam ahead.
It's part of the agreement, assuming that certain conditions are met, but how that's interpreted, what amendments might be made, that's all to be seen. Yeah. So, for those who look into it and submit, it's important that we share any concerns we have through the submissions, through our MPs, because this is an area, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a scientist. This is stuff that is very much unknown. And even the people who are working in those fields don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make sense not to be cautious. It makes sense for the companies that are working in these fields to want New Zealand to be
money and
to
do it
be
on
more
this
of an open door.
country down the bottom of the world.
Yeah, we're nice and isolated. I can see how they would like that.
Yeah, this little island where it's not going to escape.
I don't know why we should be wanting that.
Yeah.
Especially given what our exports are. It just seems way too risky.
Yeah. Wow, Maryanne, lots to think about with your column today. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Jason. Those who ignore history, as the saying goes, are doomed to repeat it. Phase 2 of New Zealand's Royal Commission into the government's COVID response is now accepting public submissions, and on 17th of February, submissions on the Gene Technology Bill close. Proponents of liberalising the use of gene technology have no desire to wait for the result of the second phase of the COVID inquiry before shaping new legislation. This is concerning, especially considering the inquiry's relevance to the future relationship between law and science. Phase 2 explores the true risks and benefits of the government's decisions regarding health orders, mandates, and lockdowns. And behind all these matters looms the elephant in the lab. Reputable experts are increasingly supporting the origin story that is hardest to swallow. Scientists who were experimenting with coronaviruses right where it emerged probably did create COVID. Hope that a natural source may yet be discovered lingers, but even authorities who once dismissed the lab leak as a conspiracy theory have changed their mind. To be clear, asking the difficult questions the Royal Commission invites is not anti-science. Both science and democracy flourish with transparency. Science, at its best, welcomes inquiry and evaluates all answers. Controversy over the primary weapon our government employed to combat COVID, mRNA vaccines, began not with misinformed Luddites, but with the red flags raised each time leaders breached scientific and constitutional standards. If we just move on without rebuilding trust in our institutions, we will never really move on. And if we move into a world where consequences for poor decision-making are even weaker, trust will erode more and the risk of future crises increase. Improvements in safety are not inevitable with the passage of time or accumulation of knowledge. Vigilance must be baked in. In the US, the number of lab incidents reported to the NIH has climbed since 2005. They haven't just become more common, the pathogens are often more harmful. The question is not if this kind of research will result in a leak, but when. This bill, however, would create one of the most permissive environments in the world. We would even rubber stamp medical products that have received approval by recognized overseas authorities, like the FDA in the USA, which is notoriously lax. Approving gene technology should be on a case-by-case basis, taking our unique environment into account. This bill provides no assurance that, even with locally approved technology, regulators will factor in worst-case scenarios, receive public input, or operate independently of political or industry interests. Anything that might impact tourism or our high-quality edible exports, whether it's the lure of genetically modified crops or the threat of a pathogen, has the potential to devastate our economy. Yes, the legislation governing genetic modification needs updating, but it should be informed by the past and not built on fantasies of a future where technology cures all ills. If we don't require accountability and transparency from those who wield it, technology, a hopeful hero, could instead be the villain.